Hi folks, welcome to the next edition of Serverless Craic with myself, Dave Anderson, author and contributor to Serverless Edge and technical fellow at Bizarre Voice.
Hi everyone, Mark McCann, architect at Globalization Partners and author and contributor at the Serverless Edge.
Hey, Michael O'Reilly. I'm software architect with GP and contributor with Serverless Edge. Hello.
You're going to say Matt O'Reilly there?
Matt, like Matt, it's a good name.
So we just had we've been talking about reInvent a wee bit this past few weeks, and one of the things that we didn't talk about was Serverless Espresso, which I thought was probably worth exploring. It's like Serverless Espresso smashed into one, and Serverless Espresso started off as a lab that some of the AWS serverless developer advocates put together. And I think in 2021, it was just a stall in Expo Hall, and then they've done a world tour with it, and it was back in reInvent again. But I thought it might be worth talking about that because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'll just explain what it is first. So what they do is in the Expo Hall, in any of the AWS summits, they have this barista, a proper barista set up, and you walk up, and there's a QR code with the screen in the background. So you scan the QR code, and you pop in your email address or something, and then it basically it pops up a little menu, and you say if you want like an Americano or an espresso, and you pick the type of coffee you want, and then what it does is it kicks off a flow, an event-driven flow, which pops around using like some event-driven server stuff under the hood, and eventually pops up on the screen as a number, and then the barista looks up, sees the number, makes your coffee, just calls it number 57 and gives it to you. But what's happening in the background there is there's a whole load of orchestration and choreography around events, and they've been using it as a way to explain sort of basically a serverless event-driven architecture. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's been brilliant. I know Werner called it out in the keynote as well, so they got a good shout out, which is great. And I think it's event-driven architecture can be hard for people to conceptually wrap their heads around. So I think making it real with ordering coffee and showing it how a coffee process and an event-driven coffee ordering system works makes it real. It demystifies it a little bit. It removes some of the event-driven architecture, that sounds really hard. This makes it really more approachable.
It's also the best cup of coffee you get in reInvent, so it's always good to stand and order your coffee and chat to the people at the stand. I thought I know there's a few people. There's James Bestwick, I think it was Ben Smith, Eric Johnson, Julian Wood. There's a whole bunch of them have been working on it. So it's, and one of the things that after I seen it for the first time, it said that when they wrote it, they've put it together properly. So it's a properly well architected, well designed serverless event-driven application, which is cool.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really great that it's stitching together a lot of stuff that we've been advocate for in a way that makes sense, right? So all the using AWS Step Functions, it's using EventBridge, got Lambda, API Gateway, S3, DynamoDB, Cognito in there as well. So it really brings to bear a lot of the really great technology that we would be advocating for in a way that's practical and easily consumable. And the workshop is very, very good at walking you through the steps about why you're doing what you're doing, and then how to do it, and then how to set up the rules and how to set up everything. So it really is a great way to get hands-on with event-driven architectures, serverless, in a practical way. So I think it'll take you from 0 to 5, and a serverless event-driven architecture. It's really good.
It's cool as well because you can track it, because I mean when you put in your order, that's a service which pops that event for something ordered onto EventBridge, which then pops it back onto the step function, which then takes it through like an orchestration flow around, are we open? Do we have capacity? What have you ordered? Do we have any milk for like a latte or whatever? So it works through all the steps, and then there's failure states as well. Like, so it's neat the way you see the interaction come back and forward. But what's also quite cool about it is they've put the whole thing as a lab that you can sit and step through yourself, and you can see exactly how it's implemented and spin it up. So it's a free lab, which is nice.
Yeah, just kind of looking at the lab now, and it's good what they've done, actually, looking at it, even from a perspective of, we talked about that term before, existence proof. Here you go, you've got a real-time front-end application with an applet, like an app posting a QR code, you're on your phone doing real-time transactions, interacting, and there's a lot of myths around serverless. Oh, well, it's all kind of batch-based workloads or spike-based workloads. No, here's a real-time application, that can kind of scale up and do all these sorts of things. So yeah, it's looking pretty cool.
Yeah,
and it's dead cheap to run as well. And it is proper events like coffee order, etc. And it's a proper event, not just messages.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. So if you think they actually talk about it in the workshop, if you fire it up, it's like 30p, 50p, maybe $1 if you set up the workshop and run like 1,000 requests to it. But I think AWS, in particular, the last year or so, have been really good at sort of lowering the barrier to entry for these technologies. And a lot of those workshops are really great ways to people to self-start, self-serve. So there's this one. There's lots of other workshops that are equally as good for getting started with some of these technologies.
And I would say there's two kind of myths around this space that I think they're trying to dispel. I think we first started talking about event-driven architecture. God, I think it was about 13 years ago. We had this mad idea of doing something, and back then it was really difficult because you didn't have a lot of support. So it was a really hard problem to solve technically. The stuff, the foundations just weren't there. That's the first one, that it used to be really hard, and it was always a hard thing to do. The second thing is people think of serverless as just writing all your code and functions. It's actually more like an event-driven architecture, where it's events firing off activity, not like a call stack. So when you bring these together, you have I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's a lot easier to build a full event-driven architecture than it would have been years ago. So I think that's what's nice. They're almost saying the technical challenge of this is not as bad as you think it is.
Yeah. I would argue what I'm looking at there on the review page of it is a modern application. A modern app is what AWS call it. You know what I mean? So when you look at this, it's replaced a lot of the old traditional framework adage that you would have had to pull in, and it's just like a aggregation and integration of all these various managed services to assemble that modern day application that I think we talked about that in previous podcasts.
And we've talked about it in the past, but standing up an enterprise service bus in the past, you would need a lot of money and a lot of time, and
Kinesis
even some of the old IBM stack that we've used in the past, right? You can do this yourself, and it's really, really, really inexpensive. That's just allows you to experiment rapidly and get really good feedback and learn really, really quickly. And you can give it to your teams without fear of costing a fortune.
I remember back in the day, but in previous companies, a few companies ago, but before Liberty, I remember one time somebody saying, our strategy for the next 5 years is ESB, Enterprise Service Bus. We're going to spend 3 years building it. You're going like, okay, and now you can spin it up in half an hour. It's not slick. But I mean, I think I'd say that the technical challenges are pretty done. So what are the challenges do you think about standing up event-driven architecture?
I'd say a lot of the challenges I kind of find in event-driven architectures are socio-technical. So like when you're thinking about the hardest thing is probably, do you do good domain-driven design? What are your boundaries? What teams have you got aligned with those bounded contexts, those domains? Who owns them? For me, they're not really technology problems anymore. They're more, you have to be able to solve the socio-technical side of things, which is probably the main thing. I don't know, Mark or David, would you guys run into more, but I find they're the sticky things that take a wee bit of homework up front.
And it's even just trying to tease out, well, who are the actual users and what are their needs, and what are the types of events that need to flow through this process or this business process that need to be handled by these domains. So like just bringing that shared understanding and bringing everyone onto the same page about what are the events that are flowing through your system, what are the actual key moments that matter in your business, have you captured them appropriately, and we would bring to birth those collaborative workshops like event storming or EventBridge storming to really sort of tease those things out.
Well, that's a cracking point, because I know there was definitely a cracking presentation at the previous reInvent there, where they talk about like 3 different types of events. I think it was Martin Fowler.
Oh yeah. And Gregor Holt did that as well. I remember seeing him on EDA Day. He did that. Yeah.
So a big part of that as well is like once you define your domains, and Mark, what you're talking about there is like, it's just a wee bit of consistency. And I do feel like you got to have a wee bit of engineering rigor and discipline around, well, here's how we event. And here, more importantly, here's the tooling around how we event. Here's standard ways to solve for, transactionality, correlations, and item potency. And
they're all problems that you can solve. Like I think the organizational one is a good one. And what I like about Serverless Espresso is there's really simple interactions. You sit and order the thing. It goes to the barista who makes the coffee, then he gives it back to you. It's just a single. There's one interaction and a second one. If that had be like you would talk to someone and they would talk to a waiter, the waiter would talk to a barista, the barista would talk to a milk person, the milk person talked to a waiter. If there was 6 or 7 people in that flow, it would get confusing. Which when you in a company, if a business process is owned by 6 or 7 teams, or even across 2 or 3 departments, that's where it gets messy. You know what I mean? If a single team builds something for the customer directly and there's no one else, it's usually pretty clean because you can see everything that needs to happen. You control, but I think when it gets complicated is if a business process is split over many teams and departments. But that's and you're right, Michael, it is a totally socio-technical problem.
Yeah, like a lot of this is making that visible, like big room event storming, that type of thing, just to tease all of this out and get it onto get a shared language and a shared understanding of what is the actual process. I think is some of the biggest challenges. And I think when you do have those domains and you're like using that bounded context canvas to understand, well, who are the collaborators for this domain? What events will it listen to? What rules will it apply to it? What processes will it do? And then what events will it emit? That's the key of this, right? Is understanding what those bounded contexts do and what they will listen to, what they will produce.
Just on the org thing though, would you and you guys you may have experienced it more than I have. So I guess in my head, if you're looking in sort of traditional architectures where you have to go after the ops and you have to have a team that stands up the core event and kind of the core event stream or that backbone, and that can take a period of time. And then it becomes difficult to change. Whereas in these sorts of environments where we're talking about rapid delivery kind of approaches, we're talking about, building block type mentality. And I would find that what I'm finding when I'm working with EventBridge and working in these sorts of ways is we're talking more about the value add stuff. Like what are the disciplines around? How do we make this really resilient? What are the practices to keep these things up and running? How do we maintain all that? And we're not talking about, what's the nuances of standing up like a Kafka and, our partitions and zookeepers and, who's the team? Who do I need to go and talk to get that provisioned? And, and then you're losing the ability to then just focus on building all the resiliency. Well,
that's all taken off the table, you know what I mean, by using this type of approach, which is why I think it's nice. And that's why I think Serverless Espresso Lab is good, because it makes all those, the opinions are put out for you, and then you just add on that bit, which is your business process flow. And going back to the book, the value flywheel effect, in the value flywheel, that first phase is about clarity of purpose. And clarity of purpose sometimes has been really clear about what's the customer and the business flow we're trying to build here. And let's have a good debate about how we're going to do that. And then when you get to the technical side, that opinion is already there, and you can then focus on just getting the orchestration correct, because that a lot of the underlying stuff, it's not completely solved, but it's pretty much solved for you, like apart from just making it behave right.
Yeah, and that's it. You want to position your teams high up the value chain, and if they're chasing their tail, chasing low-level technologies, trying to stitch all this stuff together, they can't be, like Mike mentioned, talking about the higher order stuff, talking about the well-architected nature of it, talking about the business value and working with the business to tease out new innovative capabilities or services, and extending the event-driven architecture with a new capability or a new offering, right? And so I think you're removing a lot of the undifferentiated stuff by following
completely
and adopting the technologies that the Serverless Espresso Lab sort of are advocating for. So you're focused more on what's the actual value here? What's the business process? What is how can I make this better? How can I make this more scalable? How can I add more business value is what your team is focusing on, not how do I scale my cluster of compute nodes, right?
Well, that's it. If your most senior engineer in your value stream team is trying to scale a bunch of EC2s, then you're working up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
So that's the crack. I mean, so good kudos. I mean, I'll definitely go and look at that lab around, I think it's workshop.serverlesscoffee.com, or just search for Serverless Espresso. And big kudos to the Serverless Developer Advocate team. They're mostly on serverlessland.com. Is that the right URL, isn't it? Serverlessland.com, where they have a bunch of their labs and stuff. But I would definitely look up the that workshop.serverlesscoffee.com. It's an AWS workshop, but it's definitely worth looking at. So that's the crack. Well, thanks for listening. So give us a like on at Serverless Age on Twitter and at the serverlessage.com blog, and give us a subscribe on the YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.